Matter.
Okay. All right. Are you happy for me to start then?
Yes, please. Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. I will share my screen. Okay. And I think we'll. Okay. This was a lesson series that I did a couple of years ago and based it on the teaching learning cycle. David Ketzelas, who's he's a trained secondary teacher, he actually wrote the unit for the mainstream class, and I did the part for the EAL. So the first stage of the teaching learning cycle is building the field. So the learning intention for this series of lessons was that the students would be able to recognise, describe and use the information report genre. And that sort of included looking at compound or complex sentences and improving their vocabulary from a more spoken language to a more written-like language. So to start off building the field, the topic was wild weather. And so we started off by looking at natural disasters in general because they were doing that in class. So we watched a video on natural disasters. We started making a poster of brainstorm ideas, what they already knew, and we added to that through the unit. We looked at definitions of what natural disaster actually meant, and I started to intentionally introduce and use the vocabulary and structures that would be used throughout the unit. We also, I did some elaboration on the concepts of natural disaster, and that also foreshadowed some of the language that was going to be used later. We used a model text with elaborations, and the students made mind maps that they also could add to as we went on. We then introduced tornadoes. We had to narrow down to just one thing to write our information report on. So we watched video that was quite informative about tornadoes in simple language, and also I introduced a model text just as introducing the content at this stage and talking about it, but also we were going to use this as a model text throughout the whole unit. So after that, they wrote their first draft. I didn't give them a huge amount of guidance, just said, write down what you know about tornadoes. So after that, we had another look at our model text and did some supported reading where we highlighted the different key vocabulary and even some, not just single words, but groups of words that we were going to use or that they needed to know, and talked about a few things like the unfamiliar structures. For example, there's a passive voice, the vortex is pushed upwards. We looked at different things like that they may have found difficult. We created some reference posters for them with key vocabulary, and also there's an embedded process in there of how a tornado is formed. So we made a kind of a step-by-step diagram explanation of how that went, so they could use that later on when they were talking about the process of a tornado being formed. We also looked at tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary, which is the way they talk about it in class. Tier 1 vocabulary is words you use all the time, simple words. Tier 2 vocabulary make your writing more interesting and more accurate. Tier 3 vocabulary is subject specific. So in this text, there was a lot of subject specific vocabulary that you would only use if you're talking about tornadoes. So we listed that down, and they added that in and kept that with them when they were doing their writing. We also looked at familiar and unfamiliar vocabulary. So for example, they might have been familiar with the word destroy, but they weren't familiar with destructive and destruction. So we looked at the words where they could find a base word that they did know and how it might appear in the text. We did lots of activities like close activities, labelling, matching activities to practice those things. And then they wrote their second draft. And you can see actually this child who, even though we hadn't had a proper look at the genre, has already started to have a look at that model text and make his writing look a lot more like the model text. I created a rubric. I didn't introduce that after their first draft because I thought it might be a bit mortifying. So I introduced that after the second draft, and we actually mapped what they had done in their first draft and then looked at how they had improved in their second draft. And that was the first time I used the rubric with the kids. And that was just based on the teaching points that I wanted them to be working on. So we then went to stage 3, learning about the genre, and looked at the different parts of the information report and what they were called and how to describe them, like what job did they do. We did some matching and ordering activities with those as a group and then separately, and labelled the model text to see how, and looked at the different parts to see how they went about doing their job. And then, you know, things like chopping up the text and reordering it, looking for putting the sentences that were alike about the same thing into a paragraph, looking for the topic sentence and putting that first, things like that. Stage 4 is supported writing, and I chose to do this as a shared writing activity so they could collaborate on it. So I revised and practiced the language of collaboration with them, just so they had different ways just to keep it nice, and also that was a language that they really needed to use in the classroom, so that was a good spot to incidentally teach that. They then did a shared writing activity using the resources that we had, and collaborating on a text together. Now, there is a video embedded in here. It's quite short. I will let it run. Hopefully we're not taking up too much time. Can you hear that?
No.
Can you hear it now? Oh, hang on, they're not talking. Can you hear it?
It's really, really faint.
It's really, really faint. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, oops, hang on. So I have not yet worked out with Zoom how to share.
So sorry, I've just realised I was muted. To share, you have to share your screen, and down on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
When you reshare again, so stop sharing and then share again, and before you click share, on the left-hand side there's share computer audio.
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And I could not find it, and my tech support here.
So if you go to share screen, and you get that box. And
share computer sound.
Yeah. There.
Thank you. See, we're learning.
Yes.
To share your computer audio, please install the Zoom audio device.
Oh God. Okay.
Okay. Let's forget that, and we'll just
but
won't
just
worry
for next
about
time, so that you know
yes.
whatever's happening.
Okay.
Sure.
All righty. Okay. So then they, after collaborating and doing a shared edit, they moved on to doing their third draft of their writing. So the rubric then started to look a bit like this, with a different colour for each time that we looked at their writing, and we did a conferencing, you know, each time, and looked at it and decided where the tick should go for each thing, so they could see their progress, and they could also have a look and see what the next step was for them. So this is the independent writing, which was their final draft, and looked quite different from that first draft. They made minimal changes probably from their third draft, just using feedback from me and using the rubric as well. And then at the end, they did a reflection where we put down their first draft and their final draft, and they talked about the different things that they had done, the changes that they'd made between their first draft to their second draft to their third draft, and why they made those changes. And through the questioning and the way that we'd been focusing on it, they referenced things, and unfortunately I can't show the video, referenced the rubric and how they'd used that, and the structure that they had used and what the different paragraphs did, and they referenced the way they had improved their vocabulary as well. So the reflection at the end of the teaching learning cycle, I think, was a really, really good tool for me as a teacher to assess what they'd understood and what they'd learned, but also for them, I think it made it really clear. So that's it.
Fantastic. So I think I'm going to let students ask a question in a moment, but I wanted just to allude you to, there was so much in there, so many ideas for activities. So they're all things that you can be considering for your curriculum plan that you need to do in regards to your picture storybook. So I think, so many ideas in there. It was just really great to see the process. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I'm not sure if you said it at the start, but how old were these kids that you were working with?
You're right, I didn't say that at the start. They were grade 5, 6 students,
Oh,
and they'd been in Australia between 18 months and 4 years. So at various stages of EAL or English language learning.
So when you talked about like the different types, like the words that you use every day, and then the 2 and 3 types,
Yes.
did they struggle with that?
No, I use that particularly because that's the language they use in the classroom. At my school, they talk about tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3 words. So it's better for me with the EAL kids to use the language that they're going to be hearing in the classroom. And it was quite useful with something like this, where you did have some tier 3 vocabulary and they had to learn and they had to use the right word, even though it was a difficult one. You couldn't really they couldn't really use easier words to say something like supercell thunderstorm. They had to use the correct terms, and that was a good learning focus for them.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Okay, so did you have anything else that you'd like to share, Michelle? Thank you so much. That's such a wealth of information, and I think seeing it visually really helps us to be able to, know what they can do for their own curriculum plans.
Good.
I had one question I just thought of then. From like the start of like the activity when you first introduced like the natural disasters to the end where they did their final draft, like how long was that in terms of like timing?
I see those students, I was seeing about 3 periods a week. So a single and a double period a week, and in small withdrawal groups. So that actually took us probably 8 weeks, because they only came in every now and then. In their classrooms, they actually had to do 3 different information reports and put them into a little booklet about different natural disasters. So this sort of worked them up to doing one of those reports, as well as hopefully giving them learnings that they could transfer over, some did, some didn't, into their other information reports that they were writing for their classroom. So we started at the beginning of term, at the beginning of their unit. They had to produce those by the end of term, the end of their inquiry unit. And so we kind of progressed as we went and gave them a couple of weeks at the end to implement that with their other information reports as well.
I just wanted to ask, what was their end result? Like at the end, you suggested that you gave them a rubric for their second draft. What was their overall average, I guess, on the results?
They all improved, because I think the use of a rubric is really good in that sense. You can't make a rubric for everything as a teacher. You don't have time. But when you've got a targeted, if you've got an extended series of lessons like that, and you've got clear goals that you want them to achieve, if you can think of incremental stages where they can work towards those goals and they can clearly recognise and put them into a rubric, it does give them a really good structure for seeing where their writing is and how they can make it better. What's the next thing that I have to do to improve my vocabulary use? What's the next thing I have to do to make sure the structure of this is an information report structure? So it actually really helped them to see what the next step was. And they got quite ambitious. You know, they went, well, I'm not going to the next step. I want to actually jump 2 steps. So let's read what that is and what I have to do. And then they try and make their work reflect whatever that descriptor was. So, and I like to use colours
I was just
for
going to
the
ask
students,
you
because
about,
visually I think that gives them a real idea of how they're progressing, and it makes them feel good about what they're doing too.
Yeah, I was really interested in the colours because I'm a great believer in colour coding, and I thought that was really good. So are the students themselves, do they take part in sort of the adding wherever they're at on the rubric, or is that just private?
Yes, we did that together. So we sat down,
Right.
looked at the writing, and we said, you know, what do you think? You know, from at the beginning, we were looking at things like, do you have capital letters and full stops? Do you actually have sentences?
Yeah.
You know, so the first job for some of them was putting
Some of those
capital letters and full
structural,
stops, so that you actually have sentences, so that all your ideas are broken up into sentences. And that was the first stage on the rubric. But then how are your sentences organised? You know, do you have those 4 different paragraphs in? That's as far as we went, was just 4 paragraphs, which was enough for them. But it gave them, you know, they could put in their capital letters and full stops. Great, I've achieved that one. Now what do I have to do next? And so that's where a rubric is really good.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? That was really informative. I hope you've got lots of ideas to think about for your own curriculum plan. So thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate that input and the effort into doing the PowerPoint. And so who would like to go next?
I'm happy to go next.
All right, Leo. I really should have, I'm so sorry, Michelle. I really should have said what your role was. I realised I didn't actually say.
Oh, would you like me to?
Yes, please. It was a little bit backward. But
sorry, it is a little bit backward. I teach EAL. I'm the EAL specialist at Preston North East Primary School. So I take withdrawal groups from prep to grade 6, and I also look after the EAL assessment and support the classroom teachers to assess against the EAL curriculum.
Oh, thank you. I apologise for that being backward, my bad hosting. So Leah, if you wouldn't mind sharing what your role is, and are you okay to share the screen, what you would like to share?
Yeah, I'm trying to put screen 2 so I can see you and have my other monitor on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll be all right. I'll see in a minute. So I'm at Blackburn English Language School. So I'm the learning specialist there. So I've been the learning specialist for 3 years now. The first year was acting, and now this is my second year where as leading teacher and supporting teachers going in the classrooms and demonstrating strategies and providing professional learning, attending professional learning teams for mentoring, coaching, demonstrating strategies. So that's my role, and I also teach. However, this term, due to remote learning, I didn't teach, or I don't teach, but I taught last term. So my role this term as a learning specialist is observe classes and have those reflections with the teachers and search for remote learning strategies and how can we improve, especially for English as additional language students, because we've got beginners, like we've got the students come to us for the first 2 terms for Whitehorse campus, but for the Wodonga and Maroondah campus, they stay for 4 terms. So they're just starting their Australian classroom environments with us.
Yeah, so I can imagine that must be really, it's challenging enough, but having English as a second language must be equally as as challenging. So
Definitely, especially the S1.1, S1.2 or the C1 now with the EAL curriculum. They're the ones that they need the additional support, and within that group, you know, we have to create smaller groups and do more explicit teaching, yeah, by differentiating and stuff. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so let me try to share screen 2. Share. Are you able to see?
Yes.
Yeah. So this happened, I think, about a year or 2 years ago, and Jessie was the main teacher, Jessie Sunbell. So she was the home group teacher, and I supported as a learning specialist going in the classroom and demonstrating or differentiating for the small, like in different groups. So our topic, our theme was our city, Melbourne, and the level was S1.1, as I said, to S1.2. And, oops, sorry, it just stopped. Yep. So a little bit of the learning context. I'm not going to read it all, but the last 2 paragraphs, it was a beginner level class at the school. The students were aged between 12 to 14 years old, and the level, as I said, was S1.1, S1.2. And we decided to focus as a recount genre on the Melbourne city, and this was completed 2 weeks after the excursion. So we did about 20 hours of teaching dedicated on this genre of a recount. So building knowledge of the field, I think for the teaching and learning cycle for us, and especially a beginner class, we spend a lot of time to build that field for our students. So the background information, and in this situation, we talked about the big ideas of the unit and learning about Melbourne City and explaining the final outcome. What is it that we're learning, and what are we going to produce at the end of this unit? So we told them that we're going to visit, like we're going to write a recount from our experience in the city. Then we showed students with landmarks, famous landmarks from around the world. We labeled the pictures with the landmarks, and we had descriptive vocab. And then there were new words introduced, like synonyms, where we had a word book where the students will copy the word in the word book plus meaning in the first language as well. And they had to write sentences about famous landmark using new vocab, like filling the gap activities. We decided to do a recount genre because we felt that was really what our students needed, because it was the beginning, the foundation time for them. So they needed to be able to express orally, about the events for a recount, but also to write it. So in the teaching and learning cycle, we tried to move from the spoken to written, and from written to spoken, from the register continuum. So the students were aware of all the objectives, of all the learning intentions, and they knew that the final task was a recount that they had to produce independently. Sorry. Then we went to the excursion, and there was not a lot of teaching about the excursion. So we wanted them to have that authentic learning and look at the 6 landmarks, and then complete range of activities to understand why the landmarks are important in Melbourne. They took photos, they took videos, and that was all to sort of stimulate discussions and elicit vocab for future classes. So it was targeted, the activities that we wanted them to do were targeted for when we returned back to the classroom. Then we reflected about the excursion, and we used interactive tools because we didn't want them only to write. And we used the answer garden as a tool where we used synonyms for describing places and keywords that we wanted the students to know about the landmarks. Again, here we're building the field. We created a word wall with participants, processes, and circumstances. These are from functional grammar and functional language. So because at our school we want all the teachers to be to learn about functional grammar. So we're offering a program, the modules, the 10 modules. So therefore we tried to bring that back in the classroom with this group, because we needed to build the sentence structure. So that was the aim where we were coming from. So therefore we took simple sentences and we unpacked them as a clause, and then we broke it into the verb, process, participants, the noun groups and circumstances, the prepositional phrases. And then we did it in a form of questioning, the who, the what happened, who, and then where, when for circumstances. And you'll see a little bit further down what does that mean. And it was powerful because the students were able at that level to identify the processes, the verbs, and knowing the different parts of the sentence. Then again, building the field, and you can see we have stayed a bit longer in building the field for this particular group. So we practice orally using the new vocab in pairs, and like I said, moving from spoken to written on the register continuum. Here you can see we did the first draft in building knowledge of the field for the recount, and we focus on the new vocab that we've learned during this time. So we supported the teachers and myself, plus an AMA, about using more from spoken to more formal technical terms. So you can see the example here. If the students wrote the museum is important because we can see many things, then the teacher will paraphrase by saying the museum is important because it has a range of historical artifacts. And we had the World War, like the word war around us, and the books that they were using and writing the new vocab. And then we moved to supported reading after all that. So we provided a number of different reading sessions where we modeled and we shared reading for fiction and non-fiction texts related on the city, and we targeted narrative, we targeted an information report and a descriptive text about Melbourne City. And we did a lot of pre, during and post reading tasks with, a lot of activities for comprehension, close exercises, sentence making. So it was a lot of explicit teaching about reading as well before we moved to the next stages. And we wanted the students to read aloud for pronunciation and learning the new vocab. We also identified and discussed how the language in a recount isn't different to a narrative. So then we focus on those two texts, and we did a Venn diagram with them to identify the differences and similarities, especially for using grammatical structures like past tense, and and in a recount is more of like, first I did this, after that, but in a narrative it's got more of characters, personas and things like that. And then we moved learning about the genre. So the next stage. So here we gave them a model text where we cut it and we cut the paragraphs. So then the students had to sequence the order using the language of a recount. And we did it in pairs, and then they had to explain orally or annotate choices. They were manipulating the language and playing hands-on with these. And then they had to highlight and identify the processes, past tense in the sentences, and with a lot of pronunciation here, especially about past tense. And then we provided students with cut-up sentences. So they had, the process and multiple circumstances, following of functional language color coding, and you will see in a minute what I mean by that. And the students had to create sentences with a cut up, so they had to move the words with a partner and see and make the same meaning making in small groups. So students, as you can see from the cut ups here, the cut out sentences, they had to create the sentences and then they had to write them. So this scaffolded the students to create simple sentences and also to learn the way of structuring a sentence. So again, we were recycling from the beginning of what we were doing about building sentences or sentence structure. And this is what I mean by using functional grammar or language. So you can see that the process is in green, and then you've got participant in red, and then circumstances in blue. And then all this happened with simple questions like what happened? I went. Who went? I went. Where did you go to, when did you go to Melbourne on Wednesday? Where? To the Melbourne Museum. With whom? With my class. So this is how we targeted the functional language with process, participants and circumstances, and then students were able to move the circumstances in different, like in the beginning of the sentence or the end of the sentence. So we taught them those rules as we were going very explicitly. Then supported writing, so they had to write with our support or in pairs, and they had to create 2 different sentence combinations from the cut up language, and then they jointly ended the text together as a whole class using the hover camera and interactive whiteboard, and then the students had to edit their own text, adding circumstances to their sentences, because that was an area that the students needed further elaboration and support with. Again, they had to type the work, and then they had to support through peer assessment. And Jessie had also created a very simple rubric for self-reflection and peer feedback and teacher feedback. So then it was a lot of interactive support from each other, and also looking at each other's work and providing feedback from teachers and students. And then they did the independent writing. So we did multiple revisions, lots of drafts, and revisiting and reflections, and supporting and providing feedback for each session. And during this stage, some students required extra support, so we had to differentiate for them and make sure that one of us will work more explicitly in smaller groups to provide that support for them. And then we use, again, as I said, the typing, including paragraphs, double spacing. So it was IT support there too, of how to type and how to put it in paragraphs, and and then again the students had to print, and then they started highlighting again the processes, the participants and circumstances, and looking through that, and they were able to identify the mistakes and correct their own mistakes if they needed to add circumstances. And then after all that, with feedback and reflections, we saw that the reflection was really powerful here, because then that gave the opportunity to see the progress by achieving their goals and by being successful in their writing. And they felt so proud because they were able to do that. And then we were setting new goals as well for future learning with the students. And our reflection from this, and as a learning specialist myself, I think this was really powerful for S1.1, S1.2, because initially we were leading and we were instructing and we were providing explicit teaching and modeling, providing different models of genres. And then we just saw a bit of a gradual release where the students were able to become the learners in their own learning, or the teachers maybe in the and it was so visible and they were able to move the circumstances from the end to the beginning of the sentence and have the same meaning, and the positioning the readers in the sentence writing in order to emphasize specific things that they wanted to emphasize. And the confidence increased. They participated in activities and other classes, not this particular class. They were so confident to talk, to pronounce. So for us, for GC and myself, it was an unforgettable experience, because these students will see us outside the classroom and they will have conversations and they will tell us how proud they were of the learning and, you know, and what they were wanted to achieve in the future. So they were setting goals for the future. So yeah, I think that's it for me.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I have one question. You were saying that I think their English language was on a S1.1 and 1.2 level. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm not familiar with those terms. So what does that look like?
It is S1, so they're beginners in, like, they're not beginners. They had previous learning from the country, so they are educated, like, from where they're coming from. But in English, we had to, we need to support them with, sometimes with decoding, sounds, the alphabet, the words, doing the frequency words, you know, sentence structure. So it is a beginner, like, scaffolding them slowly to move to the next level. So their writing is a bit everywhere, and it depends where they're coming from. If they're from Iran, they've got no capital letters, they've got no punctuation at that level. So the sentences are, like, you know, a bit like mixed everywhere. And if they're from China, they've got they don't have subjects, they don't have articles. It depends on what cultural background they arrive, that you can see that there's a lot of things missing. So they're at the beginner's level where you have to, and sometimes it's a block of writing, so you have to teach them how to do paragraphs, topic, sentence, punctuation. A lot of explicit teaching, and there's no assumption. You have to do it. Okay. So there's no point of assuming. You just have to revisit. You have to show them.
Cool. Thank you.
That's okay.
Anyone else?
Just following on from that, you were speaking about the goals and how they were really proud that they reached the goals. Were those goals set by, like, the teacher explicitly for them, or did, like, they work together with the teacher to, like, see where they were at and then, like, set those goals? Because you, like, explained how they had varied
yes,
like, varying starting points.
Exactly. Initially, we do our diagnostic assessments when they arrive. So therefore, we look at the assessments, which is about speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So we're looking all the modes, and then we identify specific goals that we see as teachers. And then we have those discussions. When they reach to a point that we can have that communication or have an AMEA with us, we do tell them, this is what we think you should focus. So we give them that feedback, and then that becomes their goals from the teachers together. We're setting that up. But then as we're progressing, the students, after all this explicit teaching, the students will come and say, I need extra support for punctuation, or I need extra support. So they're able to be more responsible. Not every learner, like in this particular group, we had about 4 or 5 that they were able, like we had about 15 or 13 students in the class. 5 students were able to articulate that. The others, we needed extra support from the teachers.
Fantastic. So anyone else? If not, we'll move on, because I am aware some of you have got classes to go to, I think at 4:30. So Barb, nice to see you again. if you would like to introduce.
Karina, yeah, hi Karina, hi Anne, hi Leah, hi Michelle, and hello to all the students out there. Okay, so I'm glad to have gone after those two. A little bit intimidating, they were so good, but they speak a lot, so that's great. I don't have to say so much. Now, let me share my screen.
Do you want to just tell us what your role is, Barb? And
sure.
What you're doing right now, yeah.
So, Just tell me what I'm doing. So I've had so many screens. Are you seeing my screen there, everybody?
Yes, there, yes.
So, yeah, my name's Barbara Dulson. I'm a learning specialist at the Blackburn English Language School with Leah, although I'm at a different campus. So I teach in the, this year I'm teaching primary and secondary with the primary secondary teachers and students. But when I developed this unit with a colleague, I was in the primary sector. That's probably where I'm most comfortable. So this unit of work is for primary age students, and the genre we chose was writing a description. The levels of our students were B1 with an extension to B2, and I'll just quickly reiterate what Leah said, that our students are new arrivals to Australia, so they come with very little English, and my students were in years, probably the equivalent of years 3 to 4, and my colleague had students in years 5 to 6 of a primary school. So with some of our students had interrupted schooling and pretty low level B level students, right through to some higher B1, B2 students.
So for those not familiar with what that means, are they beginners sort of, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Below beginner, no. Yeah. New arrivals means, yes, they have come to Australia with no English.
With
very limited,
no English, okay.
Very limited English, yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so we chose the unit houses to build this unit around the teaching and learning cycle. Building knowledge of the field, that's basically where we introduce the students to the, we want them to know the language and the understandings around the topic. They participate in lots of different activities, lots of brainstorming, lots of discussions, lots of viewing, and with new arrivals, lots of visuals as well. We try as much as possible to give them real life experiences, and so with houses it's obvious we all live in a house, so that's a good place to start with some background knowledge. And the other thing we always tap into is that the houses that they have left behind, because often there's a strong attachment to their housing from the countries that they've left, and so we like to build on that knowledge as well. So yeah, we elicit prior knowledge. This was one of the activities that my colleague did, a KWL chart. What do you already know about houses, and what would you like to learn?
Sorry, Barb, just for a moment. Can I just ask you to make your screen a full screen? Up at the top there, your little square, yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's a bit.
No, just.
Oh, right at the very top.
Yeah, there we go. That's.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Sorry.
I've got a big, huge screen here. Look, big screen.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you.
Okay, now where was I up to? KWL chart. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to go into detail about these sorts of activities. Probably not, but I'll just flip through them. But interrupt me. Anybody stop in the middle and ask me questions if you want to know what I'm talking about here. But just eliciting prior knowledge really from the students about what they already know about houses. Then we usually take the students out on a neighbourhood walk. It's good to connect them to their local community, and so a data chart's a great way to help them learn the vocab and start to be able to talk about the topic, because that's the whole way through the cycle, talking to learn. At every stage there's a lot of talking, and especially with our EAL students, they need to talk first before they can do the reading and writing. We like to make models of houses inside and out. Sometimes that's collaborative. Students talk about the inside, outside the house and favourite parts of the house, just as whatever we can do to elicit some language about the houses that they're living in. We have DVDs and videos that we watch to connect students to houses around the world and compare and contrast. Word walls as well, we use a lot of those. Here, there's an image here of a student. He's drawn a picture of the outside of his house. He's using a vocab chart and the word walls to try to start writing some sentences about his own house. So this was his uncoached draft at the very start of building the field stage. We would have done some labelling as well just before that, especially outside the house is where we usually start with the students. Gradually build up the vocab for them, outside and inside the house. That's an example of 2 students' uncoached drafts. They're pretty poor quality. I don't know if you can see those, but the one on the left, the B1, so this is a very low level student with interrupted schooling, and basically he's just written things like 1 chimney, 1 garage. He's just looked at a chart and there's no sentences. Oh, my house is big. I suppose that's an attempt at a sentence, but pretty much just 1 to 2 word sort of phrases he's writing. The other one's a bit more advanced at a B2 level, writing sentences. So now we move on to supported reading. The aim there is to build reading strategies and knowledge of the topic through modelled, shared, guided and collaborative reading. We expose the students to a range of fiction and non-fiction texts. There's an example of a text, Michelle, you'll be familiar with that one, about a boy who loses his shoe in the house, and so we look at prepositional phrases there just to help the students build up their language about where he looked for his shoe, introduce them to plans of the house as well, as many visuals as we can. Summarising, making notes from texts that you're reading, sentence making. Leah, I know you spoke about sentence making, no doubt you did too, Michelle. Locating specific information, so trying to extend the vocab and especially sort of the specific topic vocabulary, very difficult with new arrivals. But in the higher B stages, there's more of an opportunity to build on that, to build a bit more specific language, specific vocab really around housing.
I'm really, really sorry to interrupt.
No, don't be.
Just with that thing there that says it has 3 bedrooms, it's close to mum's work. Would you give resources like that to those kids and just let them explore, or would you sort of talk through, like, would they be able to read that on their own?
Some would and some wouldn't. Yeah, no, that's so. This text would have been in a guided or a shared reading situation where the teacher would be modelling the reading. It wouldn't be an independent task necessarily, but just helping them understand how the language features of those sentences. So they've all got the present tense verbs which they need to have for their description, but just extending the knowledge, like it has a place to park mum's car, then they wouldn't know to put those words together like that. Yeah. So they might use that sentence structure to build their own sentences.
Okay.
It wouldn't be an independent task, no.
Right, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. So poems, songs, rhymes, chants, anything where we can recycle the vocab, we take advantage of that. Dict gloss, this is quite a difficult strategy. My lower level students wouldn't be able to cope with the text. That's very challenging, but this is, I don't know if you want me to explain dict gloss, but it's where the teacher reads a passage and the students try to rewrite it from memory or from what they've heard. So, and they work in pairs or in small groups to recreate the text. Responses to texts, I'll flip through, I'm looking at the time. I'm up to learning about the genre. So we found, my colleague and I, that it's very difficult to find appropriate texts for our students. So we had to write our own, and that's a really tough task, as we found out. And luckily we had a mentor helping us who picked the eyes out of all of our model texts. But we came up with 3 for a low level, and then 2 model texts slightly higher level. So we use those to teach the students about the genre. We deconstruct them, put headings, and the students, I think as Leah was saying, you cut the text up and re-sequence them. Learning about the language features of the texts as well. Structure. Again, we do a little bit of functional grammar with the students too, helping them with their sentence structure. And we particularly work on nominal groups in this stage of the cycle, helping the students to extend their sentences just from writing a chair, a black chair in the bedroom. Something just to try and build it up. One small purple white toy aeroplane. Yeah, just helping them go beyond what they are able to produce orally. So nominal groups is something we do spend a lot of time on when we're learning about the genre. Supported writing, we do a joint construction here. So we find a plan of a house, a picture of outside the house. So together we will jointly construct. Anne, you know all about joint constructions. Anne and I have done some of those at Monash. And so jointly construct the text with the students offering up the language, and the teacher then either recasting it or writing what the students are saying and helping, teaching them jointly how to construct a good description. Sometimes collaborative writing, working with groups. And then finally, the independent use of the genre. So now they're writing their own. They develop a plan first. We use this sort of idea of a graphic organizer with the whole house, but breaking it up into inside, outside, and then some specific rooms of the house. So the students were able to build up their description in that way. Their independent writing, my students just love using the computer, typing up their final draft. They had a house plan that they had drawn of their house. So this is now a description of their own house, and they're very proud of that. There's an example of an uncoached draft through to the finished product, independent use of the genre. So you can see he's gone from trees, house, brick, key, roof. This is my house. I live in a big house, blah, blah, blah. So there's another example of a uncoached draft through to independent use. And obviously there's been great improvement, and as you said, Leah and Michelle, the students are very proud of their achievements. Yeah.
Great.
There we go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
How do I unshare?
So just click
oh, stop share. Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Screens, I'm getting. Ooh.
I know. Does anyone have any questions for Barb? Such good information from all of you. Thank you so much.
I just have like the same question as we had before, but how long did all of that take?
Oh, yeah. So that was about a 3-week unit. My student, we're an intensive language school, so the students are at this. That's English every day, 5 days a week. So that would have taken about 3 weeks.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks.
Welcome.
And Theron?
The question was if they were able to provide a reflection on how they believe they did and like the work that they were given.
Yes, we had a rubric as well, and we went through that at the end. Yeah, the students knew before the independent writing stage. They knew what was expected of them. So we went through the rubric together, and then after they'd done their independent writing, we sat to, it was sort of like a one-on-one writing conference situation, and went through what they'd achieved. Yeah.
Great. Anybody else?
It's 4:29, Karina.
Yeah, I know. So
you're going well.
I just noticed that Michelle popped in a link to the Victorian curriculum, to the EAL section that you might like to take a look at. And I just want to thank you, Michelle, Barb and Leah and of course Anne for attending today and giving us some great information and food for thought for their the curriculum plans that they're going to be creating for their picture storybooks. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Valuable at the moment. So
you're welcome.
A pleasure.
Great. Thanks for inviting us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. So
good luck with everything.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. So if there's nothing else, we can finish, and I'll stop recording.